The day Adewale Coker sat on the pavement outside his own company's gate and begged his own security guard for water, the guard refused him. Not cruelly. The guard, a young man named Tund who had been at the gate of Coker Holdings on Victoria Island for 11 months, simply looked at the dusty, hollow-eyed man crouched against the compound wall with the specific blankness of someone who had been trained to see certain kinds of people as not quite a problem to be solved and not quite a person to be helped. Just a presence to be managed, like a broken gutter or a stray dog that had wandered too close. Tund said, "Move away from the gate. This is private property." The man on the pavement said nothing. He shifted 3 feet to the left and sat back down. He had been sitting outside this gate, on and off, for 9 days. His name was Adewale Coker. He was 43 years old. He was the founder, chairman, and sole majority shareholder of Coker Holdings, a Lagos conglomerate that owned controlling interests in a logistics company, 2 manufacturing plants in Ogun State, a shipping agency in Apapa, and a commercial property portfolio that included, among other assets, the very building whose gate Tund was currently guarding. He had been sleeping on the streets of Lagos Island for 9 days, eating from roadside food vendors who gave food to anyone who asked, and from a church feeding program in Broad Street that operated on Tuesdays and Fridays. He had a beard he had grown specifically for this purpose, clothes he had bought from Yaba Market for 300 naira, and a phone with a cracked screen that he kept in his trouser waistband and checked only when he was certain no one could see the screen. He had not bathed in 4 days because he had found that the smell was the most efficient signal. It changed how people looked at you faster than anything visible. The 9 days had already told him more about his company than 12 years of boardroom reports. This requires explaining. But to explain it properly, you need to understand who Adewale Coker was before he was sitting on a pavement. He had grown up in Mushin, the third of 5 children of a man who ran a small hardware shop on Ajij Motor Road. His father, Pa Coker, was a precise and honest man who believed in the value of work and the danger of credit and the importance of paying people what you owed them before you paid yourself anything at all. He had run his hardware shop on these principles for 22 years and had built, from nothing, a business that provided for his family, educated his children, and earned him the specific respect of a community that had watched him operate and found him to be what he said he was. When Adewale was 19, a larger supplier, a wholesaler from whom Pa Coker had been buying goods for 16 years, had decided to cut the small retailers on Ajij Motor Road from his supply chain in favor of a single large buyer who could take more volume. He had given Pa Coker 2 weeks' notice. The hardware shop had not survived the disruption. Pa Coker had closed it within 6 months. He had never reopened it. Adewale had watched his father close the shop. He had helped carry out the last of the stock. He had watched the older man's face as the shutters came down. Not grief, exactly, because Pa Coker was not a man who performed grief, but something quieter and more durable than grief. The expression of a man who has discovered that the thing he built with his hands and his honesty was not as protected by those qualities as he had believed. Adewale had been 20 years old when his father closed that shop. He had carried the lesson of that face for 23 years. He had built Coker Holdings on a single principle, which he had written on the inside cover of a small black notebook on the day the company registered, and had kept a notebook of the same kind ever since. A business is not what it says it is. It is what it does when no one important is looking. He had built the logistics company at 31 with a single contract from a manufacturing firm that needed reliable last-mile delivery in Lagos and had not been able to find it. He had hired 12 drivers, paid them on time every month without exception, and told them that the only way the company would grow was if every client could trust that what was promised would be delivered. The first year had been difficult. The second had been slightly less difficult. By year 3, word of mouth had given him 7 more clients without a single sales call. He had expanded carefully, in the way of a man who had watched overexpansion destroy other people and had decided the lesson was worth learning from a distance rather than from the inside. He added the manufacturing plants when he had the capital and the management capacity to run them properly, not when the opportunity simply appeared. He added the shipping agency when a partner he had trusted for 6 years offered to bring it into the group, and he had spent 3 months examining the partnership from every angle before saying yes. By 40, Coker Holdings had 240 employees across 4 divisions and a reputation in Lagos business circles for the specific quality that Pa Coker's hardware shop had once had on a Jeej Motor Road, for being what it said it was. Then Mrs. Adeyemi had placed the report on his desk. Mrs. Adeyemi had been with the company for 9 years. She had joined as a mid-level accountant and had risen to head of audit through the specific combination of intelligence and relentlessness that made her, in Adewale's assessment, the most valuable person in the building whose name was not on the building. She had placed the report on his desk on a Thursday morning in February and had stood beside his desk while he read the first page, which took 4 minutes, and then looked up at her. The report said, in the careful language of a woman who chose her words precisely, "There are things happening in this company that the official reports will not show you, because the official reports are produced by the people the things are happening to, and the people the things are happening through. If you want to know what your company is actually doing to the people inside it and outside it, you will need to see it from outside it." He had read the full 22 pages over the following 2 hours. Then he had called Mrs. Adeyemi back in and asked her 2 questions. The first was, "How long has this been going on?" She had said, "Long enough that it is now the way things are done rather than the exception to how things are done." The second was, "What do you suggest?" She had said, with the specific calm of a woman who had been waiting a long time to say this, "I suggest you go and look." He had arranged everything with 4 people. Mrs. Adeyemi, his personal lawyer, his most trusted PA, and his eldest son Femi, who was 21 and had the specific quality of knowing when to say nothing. His wife, Remy, had been told he was on a private retreat, which was not entirely false. The board had been told the same. His driver had been given paid leave. His car had remained in the compound. Then he had gone to Yaba Market, bought the clothes. A faded blue shirt, worn trousers, rubber sandals, the kind of things that signaled a specific income bracket to anyone who looked. Stopped shaving, and walked out of the Lekki house he had built from the profits of 12 years of honest work, and into Lagos. The first day he spent at the logistics depot in Isolo. He sat in the car park on an upturned crate and watched the loading dock for 6 hours. What he saw in those 6 hours had determined that he would be in Lagos for longer than the 3 days he had originally planned. The drivers at the Isolo depot had a system. It was not complicated, and it was not hidden. It operated in the open, in the full view of everyone present, which was itself a signal of how long it had been running and how normal it had become. Goods were loaded to the recorded weight. Then, between the loading dock and the delivery vehicle, a portion of the load, not large, never large enough to be obvious in a single delivery, but consistent across multiple deliveries, was removed and set aside in a corner of the warehouse that was not covered by the security cameras. At the end of the day, the removed goods were collected by a man in a pickup who was not on the company roster. 3 supervisors managed the process with the practiced efficiency of people who had been doing something long enough that it had stopped feeling like what it was. Adewale had sat on the upturned crate and watched this happen and had written in his notebook, in the small cramped handwriting he had developed over years of field notes. They are doing this in front of everyone. Which means everyone knows. Which means the culture that allows it is more dangerous than the theft itself. On the 3rd day he had gone to the gate of the Ogun State plant. He had been told by a man he had spoken to at the church feeding program, a man who had worked at the plant for 2 years before being let go and who talked about the experience with the specific bitterness of someone who believed he had been treated unjustly, that the gate hiring process for casual labor was worth observing. Adewale had stood at the gate in his market clothes, among the men who came every morning hoping for a day's work, and watched for 4 hours. He had watched 2 security managers work through the line of men with the systematic calm of people conducting a legitimate assessment, and then he had watched the line thin until only the men who had pressed folded notes into specific hands remained. He had pressed nothing. He had not been selected. He had written 2 names in his notebook. On the 5th day he had entered his own head office for the first time. He had walked into the lobby of Coker Holdings on Victoria Island in his market clothes and sat in one of the chairs along the far wall. Not the good chairs near the reception desk, which he had noticed were reserved, by some invisible rule, for people in suits, but the chairs along the far wall where the air conditioning did not reach as well, and the lighting was slightly dimmer and which were, on reflection, the chairs you sat in when the building had already decided you were not the kind of visitor it was prepared for. He had looked at his own portrait. The photograph had been taken 3 years ago by a professional photographer who had spent 40 minutes adjusting the lighting to find the version of Adewale Coker that communicated precisely what a founder and chairman of a Lagos conglomerate should communicate: authority, competence, warmth measured in careful proportion. The man in the photograph wore a dark suit and a blue tie, and had the expression of someone who ran things and understood what running things required. The man sitting beneath the photograph wore a faded blue market shirt with a small stain at the left cuff, and had the expression of someone who had not slept in a bed in 9 days, and was managing this fact with the specific internal discipline of someone who had chosen it. He had sat for 4 hours. In those 4 hours, 11 people had come through the lobby with appointments and been processed through by Chioma with professional efficiency. 3 people had come in without appointments and been handled with a particular brand of regret that was professional, but not warm. 2 delivery men had been directed to the service entrance without being offered a seat. And 1 man, a vendor selling phone chargers from a bag, had been asked to leave by a security guard who had then looked around the lobby to see if the request had been observed approvingly. Nobody had spoken to Adewale. Not once. A security guard had asked him to move to a different chair at the 2-hour mark because a group meeting was coming through, and the chairs along the far wall were being cleared. He had moved. He had sat in a new chair. The group had come through, arranged themselves in the good chairs near the desk, and been attended to within 4 minutes. His portrait had hung 6 feet above his head for all 4 hours. He had not blamed Chioma. She had been doing her job as the institution had defined it. But the definition was the thing, the invisible architecture of who was worth attending to and who was not, built into a building over years until it felt like physics rather than policy. He had written 1 line in his notebook on the 5th day. The lobby of this company tells visitors who they are before anyone says a word. On the 6th day he had been at Mama Kemi's stall when she told the woman beside her about the property supervisor's extra charge. He had been eating rice he had paid for with carefully counted coins. He had said nothing. He had written a name. On the 7th day he had sat at the church feeding program and talked to Beggar for 3 hours. Beggar was 46, lean, with the hands of someone who had worked physical jobs his entire life and the specific dignity of a man who had been careful with his money and his reputation and had still ended up at a Tuesday church feeding program through no failure of his own that he could identify. He had worked at the Ogun plant for 2 years as a machine operator. He had been let go 8 months ago during a staff reduction that the plant manager had described, in a memo that Beggar could quote from memory, as a necessary realignment of operational capacity. He had been given 2 weeks' notice and no severance because his contract classified him as casual labor despite 2 years of consistent daily attendance. Beggar talked with the unself-consciousness of a man speaking to someone he had no reason to be careful with. He described what it was like to arrive at the plant gate every morning, not knowing whether you were working that day until someone decided, not based on any posted schedule, but based on informal preferences that nobody explained and that shifted without notice. He described the supervisor who took the best shifts for his favorites and left the rest of the day's work to whoever was left, and how everyone knew this, and nobody said anything because saying something meant not being called the next morning. He described the bathroom situation. 1 bathroom for 80 casual workers, locked during working hours except for a 15-minute window twice a day, and the particular humiliation of having to plan your body around a lock. Adewale had listened to all of it with the specific expression of someone who is listening and not reacting, which was the hardest expression he had maintained across all 9 days. He had not told Beggar who he was. He had added to his notebook, on a separate page from the names, the things that did not appear on any audit: the bathroom, the shift schedule, the memo that described 2 years of a man's labor as a realignment of operational capacity. He had written at the bottom of the page, in capital letters, "These are not audit findings. These are what the company believes about people. Find out if I am wrong." He had not been wrong. On the 9th day he was outside the gate when Tun told him to move. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. And if this story is speaking to something in you, subscribe to Visa's Tales. You will not want to miss what happens when the boss walks back through that gate. He checked his phone. He sent 3 messages. Then he stood, thanked Mama Kemi for the rice she had given him on credit on day 6, and told her he had arranged to repay the debt. She looked at him strangely. She had not mentioned the credit to anyone. He straightened his 300 naira shirt and walked to the gate. Tund looked at him and said, "I told you already." Adewale said, "Good morning, Tund. Please call Mrs. Adeyemi and tell her Mr. Coker is at the gate." The call lasted 12 seconds. Tund put the phone down and looked at the man in the market shirt with the 4-day beard and the cracked phone, and something changed in his face. Not recognition, but the specific fear of a man who has understood that a mistake has been made whose full dimensions are not yet visible. He opened the gate. Adewale walked through. The lobby was clean and well lit and professionally calm. Chioma, the receptionist, stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the desk behind her. She said, "Sir, Mr. Coker." "Sir?" He said, "Is the boardroom free?" She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Please ask Mrs. Adeyemi to convene an emergency meeting. Senior management. 1 hour." He stopped. He said, "Chioma, thank you for how you have managed this desk in my absence. I have been watching. You have been excellent." She looked at his portrait and back at him. He was already at the lift. The emergency meeting happened at 10 o'clock. 12 people, division heads, the 2 deputy managing directors, the head of HR, the company secretary. They had been told only that Mr. Coker had returned unexpectedly and required an urgent meeting. Most of them had heard something from the lobby staff by the time they arrived. They were all, in different ways, composing their faces. Adewale walked in still wearing the 300 naira market shirt. He had gone to the executive bathroom on the 14th floor and washed his face and his hands and straightened his shirt, as well as a 300 naira shirt could be straightened. He had not shaved. He sat at the head of the table, his chair, the one that had been there since the office moved to this building 7 years ago, and placed his notebook on the table and looked at the room for a long moment before he spoke. He said, "I have spent 9 days on the streets of Lagos." He did not say as a homeless man. He said on the streets of Lagos, which was accurate and which carried its own weight without embellishment. He said, "I spent those 9 days at our logistics depot in Isolo, at the gate of the Ogun plant, at the Victoria Island head office lobby, at the church feeding program on Broad Street, and outside this building." He paused. "I want to tell you what I found." He told them methodically, in the order he had found things, with the specific factual precision of a man who had been taking notes and whose notes were now on the table in front of him. The loading dock in Isolo, the system, the names, the pickup at the end of the day, the security camera blind spot that was not an accident, the gate in Ogun, the notes pressed into specific hands, the names, the men who had been selected, and the men who had not been, the 2 years of Benga's labor described in a memo as a realignment of operational capacity, the property supervisor, the informal charges, the amounts, the months, Mama Kemi's name, the fact that she had been outside this building for 15 years. Then he told them about the lobby. He told them about the 4 hours and the chair he had been asked to move. He told them about the 11 people with appointments who had been processed efficiently, and the vendor who had been asked to leave and the delivery men directed to the service entrance. He told them that in 4 hours, no one had spoken to him, and that his portrait had hung 6 feet above his head for all 4 of them. The room was the specific kind of quiet that occurs when 12 people are simultaneously doing rapid internal calculations about their own proximity to what has just been described. He opened the notebook to the first page of names. He said, "There are names in this notebook. I am not going to read them now. Some of the people whose names are in here in this room. I want everyone in this room to know that I know that, and that the process that follows will be the same regardless of seniority or tenure or relationship. A formal investigation will be conducted by an external firm. Findings will be reported to me and to the board. People who have taken what was not theirs will be asked to account for it. People who had the responsibility to see this and did not will be asked to account for that too." He looked around the table slowly, person by person. He said, "I built this company on the principle that the people inside it would be treated with the same honesty I expected from them. I have not been watching carefully enough to know whether that principle survived my not watching. I know now that it did not survive it everywhere. We are going to spend the next 90 days returning to it. That is not a request." He closed the notebook. Then he said, quietly, as though it were a small practical matter, and not the sentence that stayed with most of the people in the room for longer than anything else he had said. "We will start with Mama Kemi's rent." Mrs. Adeyemi, sitting to his right, wrote something in her notebook without looking up. She was the only person in the room who did not look surprised. She had placed the report on his desk 6 months ago. She had been waiting, with the patience of a woman who understood that some things move at the speed they move, and not the speed you want them to, for this meeting. The investigations took 11 weeks. 6 people lost their positions. 3 were referred to the appropriate authorities. Others received corrective performance plans. The property supervisor's informal charges were terminated on the day Adewale walked back through the gate. Vendor rents across the portfolio were reviewed. Overcharges were refunded. Mama Kemi received an envelope she did not understand, delivered by a man from the legal department who told her only that an error had been identified and corrected. She had looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she called the woman at the next stall and said, "I told you this company had an owner who didn't know what was happening." The woman said, "Every company has that." Mama Kemi said, "Not every company fixes it." Beggar, the man from the church feeding program, received a letter 3 weeks after Adewale walked back through the gate. It was from Coker Holdings HR, and it offered him a return to work at the Ogun plant at a revised grade, with a letter of explanation regarding the circumstances of his original departure. He had sat with the letter for 2 days before accepting. He had told no one at the feeding program where it had come from. He went back to work on a Monday morning and found that several things at the gate had changed. Tund received a new set of operating instructions for the gate post. The instructions were specific, practical, and written in plain language. He read them and then wrote, in his shift log, which nobody was required to read, "Instructions updated." He did not write anything else. But at 8:30 the next morning, when a man in dusty clothes came to the gate asking if there was any water available, Tund went to the guard post, poured water from his personal flask into a cup, and brought it out. He had not been asked to do this. He had simply done it. Adewale heard about Tund's cup of water from Mrs. Adeyemi, who had heard it from the building facilities manager, who had seen it happen. He wrote it in his notebook under a new category he had opened on the day he walked back through the gate. Not the names, not the findings, a new list titled simply, "What Changed?" Tund's cup of water was the first entry. By the end of 90 days, there were 47 entries. This story is not about a billionaire testing his employees. It is not about a powerful man playing poor to catch people out. It is about a man who understood something that most people with power never accept, that the only accurate view of an institution is the view from the outside. That the version of your company that exists in your boardroom reports is not a lie. It is a picture taken from one angle, by people who know you are looking. That the picture from the pavement, taken when no one knows you are there, is the one that tells you what the company has actually become. Adewale Coker spent 9 days on a pavement, and learned more about the institution he had built than 12 years of internal reports had shown him. He learned that systems that are not watched become systems that serve themselves. He learned that the people at the edges, the vendor outside the gate, the casual worker at the loading dock, the man asking for water, are the most accurate measure of what an organization truly values. He learned that Mama Kemi had been subsidizing his company's informal income for 14 months while her daughters went to school in Suralere. He learned that Tund had not been cruel. He had been trained. He learned that his own portrait had hung 6 feet above his head for 4 hours while he sat beneath it unseen, which was perhaps the most expensive education he had ever received. And he learned, sitting on a pavement outside a building he owned, drinking tea from Mama Kemi's stall on credit, with the smell of 4 days on him and the cracked phone in his waistband, that the most important thing a man in his position could do was exactly what his father had done every morning for 22 years before the shutters came down. Show up. Look. Stay until you understood what you were looking at. Do not confuse the reports for the reality. He had called his wife, Remy, on the 8th night, from a corner of the church compound where he was sleeping, at 11:30, when he was certain most of the other men around him were asleep. He had spoken quietly. He had told her he was all right. She had said she knew, because Mrs. Adeyemi had been updating her, and she was going to have a long conversation with him about all of this when he came home, and he should come home soon. He had said one more day. She had said Adewale. He had said I know. She had said come home. He had said tomorrow. He had meant the day after. He had needed one more morning at Mama Kemi's stall. On the last morning, before he sent the messages and straightened his shirt and walked to the gate, he had sat with his tea and looked at the building he had built the money to buy 12 years into the company. The clean lines of it, the glass and the steel, the Coker holding sign that caught the morning light. He had thought about Pa Coker standing at the shutters of a hardware shop in Mushin. He had thought about the principle he had written on the inside cover of his first company notebook. A business is not what it says it is. It is what it does when no one important is looking. He had built the building. He had written the principle. He had not, somewhere along the way, kept both of those things in the same room as each other. He was going to keep them in the same room now. He had finished his tea. He had paid Mama Kemi for it, and thanked her. She had waved him off the way she waved off everyone who thanked her for small things. With the practiced efficiency of a woman, had spent 15 years on a pavement being kind to people, and had decided that gratitude was fine but time was short, and there was rice to serve. He had watched her for a moment before he stood up. He had thought, she has been here for 15 years. She knows every face that comes and goes from that building. She knows the drivers and the delivery men, and the executives who walk past without looking, and the security guards who buy rice at 8:15. She has seen this company from the outside every working day for 15 years. He had added one more line to his notebook before he walked to the gate. He had written, find out what Mama Kemi sees. Pa Coker had taught him that a business is only as honest as the people it believes no one important is watching. Adewale had written that on the inside cover of his notebook at 31. He had believed it. He had simply forgotten, somewhere in the years of building and growing and managing from the top floor, that believing it was not the same as acting on it. Now he was acting on it. The pavement outside his gate had cost him 9 days and 300 naira. It had returned to him something that no audit report could have given him, a clear picture of who his company was when it did not know he was looking. He had liked very little of what he saw. He had been grateful for every bit of it. If this story moves something in you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever seen the difference between what an organization says it values and what it actually does? Tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to Visa's Tales. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the view from the pavement is always more honest than the view from the boardroom. Because the people who are not supposed to be watching are always watching. And the ones who think no one important can see them are always the most clearly seen.